It's a Monday episode of Locked On Grizzlies, and we're excited to talk about the roster expanding. Not expanding for too long, of course, but Exhibit 10 signings were announced. Plus, Zach Edey is Damichael's X Factor, and it's football season now. So if the Grizzlies were football players and Ja Morant is attending Memphis Tiger football games, what position would Ja and others play? We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Hopefully you are not too overwhelmed from all of the football that went on this past weekend, the first weekend of NFL and college. From Thursday on, there was some sort of football being played each and every day. I'm a huge fan of that, and I think my partner, Damichael Cole, is as well. But it is football time in America, and the NBA will be back around here in the next few weeks. As, of course, if you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies, you're probably well aware of. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax. I'm joined by my co-host on this episode, Mr. Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He's an award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. You've come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies content on this Monday, wherever you are, however you're checking out the show. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel, by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, Apple. Make sure you're taking Damichael and I with you wherever you go, both audio and visual. Make sure you're subscribing and hanging out and being a part of Locked On Grizzlies each and every day, every time an episode comes out. Damichael, I hope you had a great weekend. It was a good weekend to be a Tennessee Volunteer. I will say that. I know you were excited about that, watching the Volunteers have the success that they did. I'm curious, though, beyond the football, right? Because we'll talk more about football later on in the show, the traditional if the Grizzlies were footballers portion of our podcast this time of year. So we'll talk more about football later, but I am curious, the Grizzlies make their roster this time every year kind of look like a football roster a little bit more, right? Because when you think about NBA basketball or basketball in general, you think about, 9-man rotations, 10-man rotations, maybe 12 guys on the team at the high school level, 15 in college, and the NBA as well to an extent. But with the new CBA, with the new agreements that have come out ever since COVID, especially, these NBA rosters seem to be getting bigger and bigger in a variety of unique ways. And the Memphis Grizzlies are certainly not immune to that. They made some interesting signings over the weekend called mostly Exhibit 10 contracts, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't think the Grizzlies released them, that way. I don't think that's kind of the language that they use. But,
right.
From talking to some people, that's kind of what I gathered, that those were Exhibit 10 signings. And pretty much, what that is for those who, don't understand, like you have your standard contracts, then you have, beyond the standard contracts, they're the two-way deals, pretty much is the next most popular thing. And then after the two-way deals, it is those Exhibit 10 signings, which basically are players who are more than likely going to be, quote unquote, waived from the Grizzlies after training camp. And in an Exhibit 10 deal, it's kind of part of the contract where if they're waived, they can be, reassigned to the G League roster. So basically, these are players who are going to be playing for the Memphis Hustle unless they come out in training camp and wow the Grizzlies. And, they have that 15th open spot. So an Exhibit 10 deal was a coveted, thing, for guys, with the Grizzlies, Armando Bacot, Yuki, they signed some talented guys who could come in and potentially make a run at that 15th spot. But overall, I think it's just something you could expect those guys to kind of go down with the hustle. We've seen it over the last couple of years where the Grizzlies sign guys, they come to camp, they get waived, and then they're reassigned to the Memphis Hustle where they go and pretty much spend the rest of the season.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It is a way to kind of get them a little extra money too, right? Like the traditional.
Yeah, I think
traditional G League contract is not making as much as an Exhibit 10.
Exhibit 10 guys get more money, so that's another way it's coveted. And I think if you stay on a G League roster for 2 months, it's 60 days. I think it's the language in the CBA. 60 days, you earn an extra $75,000, which goes a long way, when you're talking about G League contracts. So these are guys, if they are quote unquote waived from the Grizzlies and then they get reassigned, you could be looking at by December them getting a nice hefty little $75,000 bonus.
And again, for somebody that works a normal day-to-day job like me, that sounds pretty nice, right?
Sounds like some good money,
basketball. That sounds pretty nice to me. So I think that it's a great opportunity for those guys. You mentioned Bacot. I get a chance to shout out Richmond, Virginia every chance I get because that's where I live. Armando Bacot is an RVA legend. Obviously, also has kind of turned himself into a UNC Chapel Hill legend. Yeah, he's almost like the Van Wilder. That might be a dated reference for you, partner. You may not.
Yeah, that went over my head.
But Van Wilder was a movie. One of Ryan Reynolds, funny enough, with the Deadpool and Wolverine movie being out. One of Ryan Reynolds' earliest movies in his movie career was National Lampoon's Van Wilder, and he played a character who was in college for like a decade, right? And that was kind of the funny part of the movie. Hilarity ensues with this guy, Van Wilder. Bacot, it wasn't quite a decade, but he was at UNC for a while. And he, to me, is the most intriguing because he certainly has the lowest ceiling, right? Even of the Exhibit 10 signings, I would argue he has the lowest ceiling. Yeah. But to have as a 15th man on a roster, somebody that can rebound, somebody that can screen, somebody that can do things physically and be that body for you down low, Bacot is one that I'm going to watch. I agree that he's going to have to blow them away. Like he's going to have to show a 3-point shot or something in order to beat out other guys. And he almost certainly will not do that. I want to stress that. He's going to have to do something above and beyond. But Bacot's intriguing because he checks a box of what Memphis could theoretically use as another bigger body.
Yeah. If you watch the recent episode I did when I was kind of talking about the Zach Edey fact, and we'll get to it in the second segment, a little bit as well. But when you just look at the bigs overall right now on the Grizzlies roster, you have Zach Edey giving you that big physical presence or whatever. You got Brandon Clark, smaller guy, mobile. And then you basically have, Jaren can move to the 5 maybe, and guys like that. But you don't have that Xavier Tillman, the next big, brute. Like Xavier Tillman wasn't the tallest, like he was 6'8", but those arms made up for that. Like he got a lot of block shots, contested shots because he had a long wingspan. But basically, you're missing that second center who has that big brute force, type of ability. Like you don't want anything to happen to, Zach Edey or anything. But if he misses one game because of whatever reason, like, and you're going against a Sabonis or a Zubac, those type of guys, or Rudy Gobert, are you equipped to have someone who's are you equipped to have, the personnel who can kind of bang with those guys in the paint? And if Edey isn't in the lineup, or, Jaren is physically strong enough, but is he skillfully good enough as a rebounder? We have not seen that to be the case. So I do think, when you talk about that 15th roster spot, what should be there, what should cover there, that is one of the top areas where I think the Grizzlies could address someone. And it's just a little plug-in piece, like another physical big, and Armando Bacot would give you that.
I'm biased. Again, I want to stress Richmond, Virginia, come on, stand up. But Bacot would be pretty cool to watch and see there in Memphis. I got a couple of messages from folks over the weekend saying, oh, Bacot, he's in. I love Bacot. It's awesome. He's in Memphis. And you get a chance.
You don't like Mazina Pereira? You don't like the Brazilian? I know you saw the dunk he had from the Olympics.
That was a pretty impressive dunk. I will give him that. Again, probably a higher ceiling than Bacot. But I think Bacot checks the box of being that guy. He just feels like the perfect 15th man to me.
Yuki Kawamura is the most intriguing one on the list to me.
I'd agree with that.
He's 5'8", short, but the playmaking, I mean,
I just want to watch him play with Zach Edey during preseason. I want to see that desperately.
Did we? There's a video of them being on the floor together before. I think was it? I don't know if it was FIBA's last year. It might have, or it was in the friendlies before Zach Edey chose to the exhibition slate before he chose to play with the Grizzlies over Canada or something. I don't know when it was, but there's a video.
I need those two running a pick and roll together desperately. Yeah, I need that. Like I need the air that I breathe.
I'm thinking of him beside Wembanyama. That's the one that I saw from the Olympics this year. You
That's
remember that video? It went viral.
Mm-hmm.
But his playmaking would really, would shine. We talk about that third point guard spot. I talk about it almost, in a way, it's kind of needing that physical big.
Right.
Just as long as Scottie Pippen Jr. is on a two-way deal, that is something that will have to be addressed at some point. And maybe it's Scottie Pippen who gets that spot. I think that should be the case. But as long as it's open right now, it's open. And Yuki is a guy to watch, in the preseason as to how his playmaking translates and how they can cover him up defensively as well. That's another big part. Anytime you have those shorter point guards, you got to be able to cover them up.
Let Damichael and I know, are you team Yuki? Are you team Bacot? Are you team just give Scottie Pippen Jr. that 15th spot and sign another two-way contract? Let Damichael know and I know in the comments or over on X at Joe Mullinax for me, at Damichael C on X for him. Hit us up, be a part of the conversation here at Locked On Grizzlies. By all means, we'd love to chat with you. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel a lot. It is America's #1 sports book. And we've been talking about the NFL. Football is back, baby. And there's nothing quite like FanDuel and NFL on a Sunday afternoon. Well, we have something a little bit different for you here. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You heard me right. A 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base game plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. FanDuel is cooking this time of year with football back in full swing. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Do it now. We have been talking about these Exhibit 10 guys, and whether it's Yuki or Bacot, they're almost certainly not going to be in the mix, right? It's not going to happen. They'll be on the hustle if they're anywhere. Zach Edey is going to be on the Grizzlies roster, and you had a chance recently, partner, to be on. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was a Sirius XM NBA show, which is really cool, by the way. Well deserved. Good opportunity for you. And I think that you talked about how your X factor for the Grizzlies this coming season was Zach Edey. Now, if I'm on these preview shows, I'm going to be a complete and total cop-out and say Ja Morant, because I think it's that easy for Memphis. If Ja Morant is on the floor, they're going to be good. If he's not on the floor, they're going to be bad. Like we saw that last year pretty clearly. You went with Zach Edey, and I certainly can't argue against you, but just for our audience members who maybe weren't able to catch the segment, just a quick review of what you talked about and your logic behind Edey being that X factor for you going into the season.
Yeah, they were just asking me about, expectations for him this year. And the reason, Ja Morant, I feel like that's the given. I think when we saw the way the Grizzlies season started, it was very clear. Not even just the way the season started, but when Ja got back in your first game back, he beats the Pelicans, on the road. It was very clear, what type of impact the superstar point guard will have. But when I think of X factor, I'm thinking of like that nose guard who, when he's on the field, you have the best run defense in the NFL. You take him off the field, you're just getting gashed up the middle. The guys who do the dirty work. But they like Steven Adams in a way was for the Grizzlies. But it's Zach Edey simply because everything, from an identity standpoint that the Grizzlies did a couple years ago to reach 56 wins, to have that 51 win regular season as well. Everything that they did in those regular seasons, statistically speaking, creating the stocks, right? With all the steals, the blocks, the turnovers, the transition score, all those things are easily achievable this year with this year's roster, even though, there's a lot of roster changeover since then. But the one area that we really don't know yet, that they were dominant each of those 2 years, and even before that, pretty much every year Taylor Jenkins has been the coach except last season. The one area where they dominated the NBA was rebounding. If they want to be that, if you're saying stylistically from the standpoint of we still want to see the Grizzlies be a top transition scoring team, Ja Morant's back. Desmond Bane's going to get out in transition. We talk about downhill Des. They're going to do that. Jaren Jackson Jr., Vince Williams, Marcus Smart, who has some of the best hands in the NBA. Sure, you lost, Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton, but neither of those guys have better hands than Marcus Smart, to me. So you replace good stocks guys with other good stocks guys. Then you throw Vince Williams in the conversation. All those things are still achievable to me, Joe. But the rebounding. I think Zach Edey can have the Grizzlies in the top tier. I don't know if they'll be that number. Steven Adams he's a different breed. Like, it wasn't even him averaging 12 boards a game. It was him clearing out the space, and then the other guys being able to come out with some of those boards. And as putting that on a rookie is, quite a tough task. But he's the X factor because those are the areas I can see the Grizzlies being great in. I don't see the Grizzlies. They weren't a great three-point shooting team back then. I don't see them becoming a great three-point shooting team now, unless there are some real, outlier seasons based on what we've seen career-wise so far. So when you talk about logically what this team can do, what this team can be great at, Zach Edey, we saw the rebounder he was at college. We saw the screen setter he was at college. If the Grizzlies are a top screen assist team like they've been in the past, if they're a top rebounding team like they've been in the past, they're going to be a top 3 seed in the West. And Zach Edey would be a huge part of that.
100%. I think that my biggest thing for Edey going into the season is not being overextended. And I don't think Memphis is going to do that. I think the transition issue is going to be for Edey because he was expected to be so much for Purdue. It's easy to forget that he was the most dominant force in college basketball these last 2 seasons because he doesn't have translatable, at least to the naked eye, translatable and modern NBA skills, right?
Yeah.
But doesn't change the fact that he was an elite rebounder, especially this past season. That was something his junior year that was pointed out. He could be a better rebounder for his size. Yeah. And then he went and he got better. And that's one of the reasons that I am most optimistic about Edey is there's still room for him to grow. Maybe not physically, good Lord, but in terms of his game, there is lots of opportunity for him to keep getting better as a basketball player, even in the areas where he figures to thrive as a rebounder, as a screen setter. The passing off of screens is going to be a massive piece for him. And I mentioned I was on Locked On NBA with our friend Jackson today, and just the idea of Edey being this guy that is going to have the opportunity on a good team to not have to be everything, just be a really solid role player. That sets him up to be a top 3 rookie of the year finalist for me because it marries the idea of, okay, he's going to have stable minutes. He's not going to be asked to play 36 minutes a game, but 25 to 28 every night, I think you can expect from Edey. You couple that with the reality of they need him to be successful. Yeah. If Memphis doesn't have Edey, they'll make the playoffs still probably. It's not like Morant they'll fall off the cliff completely. Yeah. But they're probably not a top 3 seed without Edey. If Edey struggles, they're probably in the play-in. Yeah, I would agree with you. So I guess by definition, that would make him an X factor player for sure.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth there at the end. That was going to be the next point that I was going to make. And I'll say it like this. There are 3 guys that pretty much anyone can agree with that if those guys were to miss extended amount of times, it would have, a huge results on the Grizzlies. Who are those 3 guys?
John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, very, very simple. But what if I said there's a 4th player in that same conversation? And to me, that is Zach Edey. It's not Marcus Smart, even though Marcus Smart is going to have all the impact winning plays that you want. And Vince Williams as well, Luke Kennard's all those guys. But if you lose a Marcus Smart for 3 to 4 weeks, we saw the Grizzlies, not comparing Marcus Smart to Dillon Brooks, but we saw, Zaire Williams step into that starting small forward role his rookie year alongside of Ja and Dez, and the Grizzlies kept on winning with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Steven Adams in that lineup. Remember that? It was like February of his rookie year, and they just kept going. So when you think of that guy where outside of Ja, Dez, and Jaren, to me, there's only one other player on the roster. If he misses extended time, they go from a complete playoff team to a top 6 seed to a play-in. Only one other player can drop them from a top 6 to a play-in team, in my opinion, and that's Zach Edey. So considering that he's not in the big 3 and he still has that type of impact, that's the reason he's the X factor for me.
Might be entering a core four kind of situation with Edey in the fold now. Let Damichael and I know how you're feeling on X in the comments. He thinks Edey is the X factor for Memphis this year. Again, when I'm asked, I'm going to take the cop out of John Morant, but I think that by definition, Edey is the X factor for these Grizzlies beyond the big three in Memphis there. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you're contemplating. Maybe you think it's Vince Williams Jr. or somebody else like that. When this episode is over, make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA. I just mentioned it a moment ago. I'm on today's episode. Hopefully that isn't a reason that you don't check it out. But Jackson Gatlin and everybody else over there at Locked On NBA does a great job with analysis and news from West Coast to East Coast and everywhere in between. As training camp gets ready to start up here in the next few weeks, make Locked On NBA your second listen after each and every episode of Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something that you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or have you kind of lost that in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing. I've got 3 young ones. My oldest just turned 9 this past weekend. Happy birthday to Caroline. That curiosity is still there in those kids. But as adults, sometimes we lose that. Would you like to learn how to play an instrument? Maybe go gardening and get out in the backyard, get out in nature, learn a new language. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back to school era could come at any age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should seriously consider giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. As we've mentioned a couple times here, Damichael, football is back. It was a terrible weekend for my Commanders. Not the best weekend. I believe Packers, right? You're a Packers guy, if I remember correctly. Not a great weekend for your Packers. It could be worse. You could be a Commanders fan. We both had rough weekends, but I do think that it's hopefully agreeable that football season is one of the best times of the year. Football rocks. It's one of my busiest times of the year, so I have a lot to juggle with my day job, but that's okay. It's a lot of fun, and it's great to be able to just kind of sit back and watch the game. And I have my youngest is my son, and he's gotten to the point where he climbs in my lap and we sit and watch football together. So I get my father-son fix for sure on Sundays. Even though I apologize, Mitchell, in advance for indoctrinating you like my father did to me with terrible football when it comes to the Commanders. But this is always kind of fun to talk about. If you looked at the Memphis roster and the type of football positions maybe they'd play, I think we talked about this last year too, but it's always a fun opportunity. I try to harken back to Virginia where I live. The John Morant, Allen Iverson comparison is always one that people like to make for a variety of reasons, some basketball related, some cultural within the culture of basketball. And Allen Iverson, you talk to the right old heads down in the beach area of Virginia, where Allen Iverson went to high school, and they'll say that the best high school football player in the history of the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, is Allen Iverson. People don't realize that. AI was a tremendous high school quarterback. That makes me wonder if John Morant could play a little quarterback. I think he has that explosiveness, of course, to be an athlete in that position. But, just having a little fun here at the end of our Monday episode. And again, let us know in the comments, hit us up on X where you see some of these guys fitting. Ja at quarterback, and then another one that I thought of, you mentioned Marcus Smart earlier with some of the best hands in the NBA. Wide receiver makes a lot of sense, but in terms of his mentality, Damichael, I almost see him like a honey badger, like Tyrann Mathieu back from the LSU days, Kansas City, playing a little outside linebacker, a little safety.
He sacrifices his body a lot,
Yeah, so I kind of see Marcus Smart being that kind of guy from a football perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down there. I'll throw Ja at receiver. The agility that John Morant has, like we see him split those double teams, the behind the back, I feel like he'd work real well in like crowded spaces as a receiver. The hops, are self-explanatory.
Right.
So I'm throwing Ja wide receiver. I got a curveball for you for my quarterback.
I like it. I like it.
That's my hint because I got a curveball for you. That's my hint of where I'm going right here. Zach Edey. I don't know if you saw the highlights, Joe. He used to pitch. I talked to a couple people about this. He had about a 75 mile an hour fastball, had about a 71 mile an hour changeup.
Oh,
had a couple
goodness.
pitches. You know, he could throw it a little bit. And baseball pitchers usually translate. Like when you have guys who play 3 sports,
Sure.
usually the pitcher in baseball is a quarterback, you know, on the football field. So he's a bigger
Absolutely.
guy, you know. We might not have the most mobile guy there, but you know, we
No.
protect him in the pocket. He's going to see over the line. I mean, that's not going to be a problem.
No, that'll not be
And,
an issue.
and he's got an arm. So, you know, that's my QB1 right now. I'm going Zach Edey for my quarterback. You know, a little bit now. We're gonna have to protect those legs. You know,
Right.
he's got a big target, but I see, you know, a guy he got a 75-mile-an-hour fastball. You know, that ain't, you know, he ain't blowing guys away. You know,
Right.
with that, but he got a little arm. Like I'm gonna go with Zach Edey.
I like how we went in completely different directions at the
Completely
quarterback
different, completely different directions.
at the quarterback position. A couple more just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of somebody like Gigi Jackson, obviously with a healthy foot. I like Gigi as a wide receiver because I think that he has that kind of swagger and mentality to him, the ability to get open, you know, find a way to get into the end zone. I think Gigi would certainly thrive in that way. And then Jaren Jackson Jr., I'm putting a defensive end. I'm playing him as kind of a stand-up end, like old school J.J. Watt kind of stuff, letting him get his hands up, deflect some passes, be a defender in that way. I think Jaren as a stand-up 9 tech outside would be a lot of fun and allow for, you know, and the quarterback having to go away from that because it's going to be hard to get it past the wall that is Jaren Jackson Jr. defensively.
Yeah, all jokes aside for this one, because this is the one that I think, like, if he actually put in a couple summers and just, you know, like really, you know, and I want to be careful when I say that because I know the whole can football players play basketball better or basketball players like I know that's a real hot debate out here. So I want to let me tread lightly right here. But with all that being said, Brandon Clark as a tight end seems like easy. That's easy money. Like
Antonio Gates-esque.
Yeah. The Tony Gonzalez's of the world, all those guys with the basketball backgrounds, who kind of, you know, Julius Peppers was like that in a way too. But I could see him. I mean, with the second jump that he has, the first jump that he has, the leaping ability, the size, you know, talking 6'7", 6'8", you know, like some of those guys that we just mentioned, makes a lot of sense. You know, now he's Canadian, so, you know, a lot of Canadians are tend to be late to football a little bit. So I don't even know how much he likes, you know, NFL football. But look, he's got the athleticism to pull it off.
Well, and Lord knows they make enough money in the NBA now that he doesn't need to worry about that transition. He's set. But I like that. I like the Brandon Clark at tight end idea. And I really like the idea of the Grizzlies being a group that watches like NFL and college games together, right? Like John Morant being at the Memphis football game this past weekend and supporting the Tigers, being out there for the city. And the Tigers hope to have a really special year this year. So it's cool to see Ja. I like the idea of them just hanging out on the weekends at somebody's house and watching some games and that sort of thing. Because that makes them like us, right? We have to remember they're human beings like we are, partner. And hopefully they love football like we love football. So again, Locked On Grizzlies, just having a little fun with some football talk here at the end of our Monday show. When we come back, the next time we're together, Damichael, it could be a great opportunity to focus a little bit more intensely overall on the hardwood, maybe a little bit more on these Exhibit 10 guys, a little bit more detail on how training camp practice works. You know, you've actually been there in the room where it happens, so to speak. Maybe you can give a little bit more perspective on how that benefits the team overall, what they actually could be looking at. You know, lots of different ways. Maybe we take a closer look at the upcoming training camp for Memphis here in the next episode.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that's, great idea. We got a couple weeks here as we get close to training camp. So, start to dive in some of that content as well. And then we'll still have a couple more special guests to come in too. So make sure you stay tuned for that.
Very interesting. I'm looking forward to it, and you should most certainly be looking forward to it as well. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Make sure you're staying locked in. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you are getting your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Become an everydayer if you're not already one. Like, comment, again, all those fun things. Be a part of our experience each and every time an episode drops. Make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA. Again, I am on today's episode, so go check out Locked On NBA as your second listen or your second watch as we close up shop on this episode of the podcast. Again, for Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. Thank you so much for being with us. From Edey as the X Factor to Exhibit 10s and everything in between. Football's back, and so are we here on Locked On Grizzlies. Have a